let us now move straight to the topic of this video. It's quite surprising to see how YouTube is being flooded with videos that portray Brian Shaw as a legitimate competitor to Levan Saginashvili. Honestly, that notion is completely absurd. It's almost nonsensical. I'm sure most people already realize this, but the constant repetition of such a claim can lead some to believe it as truth. I think these videos are being created purely to generate views, which isn't a fair practice. It raises unrealistic expectations for viewers and for Brian Shaw himself. Let's take a closer look at why Brian Shaw is not a legitimate competitor to Levan, or even to the top 20 super heavyweight arm wrestlers. This isn't a criticism of Shaw himself. He's an incredible athlete, but arm wrestling is a very different sport. Perhaps in 3 to 4 years, if he takes the sport seriously, Shaw could become a real contender against Levan. We all know that Brian Shaw is a multiple-time winner of the world's Strongest Man competition. However, out of the 17 events in such competitions, only about 3 are even remotely related to arm wrestling strength. For example, the Atlas stones require an immense amount of grip strength, which is important in arm wrestling. There's also the arm overpull event, which resembles a tug-of-war movement, and the Hercules hold, which involves forearm and shoulder strength, both of which are relevant to arm wrestling. But apart from these 3, the remaining 14 events have no direct relation to the specific strength needed in arm wrestling. Brian Shaw is a 4 or 5-time World's Strongest Man champion, a phenomenal achievement, no doubt about that. But here's the thing. Just because someone excels in Olympic weightlifting, world powerlifting, or even wrestling and bodybuilding, doesn't mean they're automatically equipped for arm wrestling. Arm wrestling requires a completely different set of strengths, mainly in the forearms, wrists, biceps, and in some cases, triceps and core strength when applying a press or flop press technique. Look, folks, we all know that Brian Shaw is incredibly strong. It doesn't take a degree in rocket science to understand that, right? But let's not forget, there are literally thousands of incredibly strong athletes involved in various strength sports worldwide. This is not an exaggeration. Forget about the rest of the world for a moment. Just consider the United States alone, which is home to tens of thousands of super heavyweight strength athletes. Now let's add Canada, South America, Asia, Africa, and Western Europe into the mix. Then you've got Eastern European nations like Russia, Bulgaria, Ukraine, and Georgia, not to mention Scandinavian countries like Norway and Sweden. These regions are full of super heavyweight strength athletes capable of amazing feats of strength. There might be many strong people like Brian Shaw in these countries. These athletes can perform massive deadlifts, enormous bench presses, and squats with unbelievable amounts of weight. You'll also find strongmen who can pull or lift cars and perform other jaw-dropping feats of strength. But here's the crux of it all. Just because you're incredibly strong, even freakishly strong, doesn't mean you can automatically succeed in arm wrestling. It really does not work that way. For example, we've seen athletes like Braun Strowman, a 380-pound giant who is both a strength athlete and WWE superstar, and Bob Sapp, a 370-pound WWE star and MMA fighter, get absolutely demolished by someone like Devin Larratt in arm wrestling. Larratt, one of the greatest arm wrestlers of all time, isn't even close to their size. He's only about 255 pounds. At his heaviest, he was around 290 pounds. But even then, he could easily defeat much larger opponents in arm wrestling. Similarly, legends like John Brzenk, even at 60 years old, can still defeat super heavyweight powerlifters, strongmen, and weightlifters in arm wrestling. And there are other top-tier arm wrestlers like Kadergali Ongarbayev, Irakli Zirakashvili, Chance Shaw, and Monster Michael Todd, who, by the way, isn't really a monster at all, even at his heaviest of around 300 pounds, who could crush any non-arm wrestler in a match, no matter how strong they might be otherwise, simply because arm wrestling is a different sport entirely. The same goes for lighter arm wrestlers, even those in the 170 to 200-pound range. They can also easily defeat super heavyweight strength athletes who are non-arm wrestlers. So, being a strongman champion does not automatically translate to success in arm wrestling. I'm not saying anything that seasoned fans of the sport don't already know. This is why the current hype surrounding Brian Shaw's arm wrestling potential just doesn't make any sense. The fact is, he's only been training for arm wrestling for about 4 months. He hasn't even participated in any official matches or faced off against any notable arm wrestlers from the lighter weight classes, let alone the elite competitors like Ermes Gasparini, David Dadakian, or John Brzenk. Before we can even begin to discuss Brian Shaw competing against the world's top arm wrestlers, he first needs to prove himself by regularly beating mid-tier arm wrestlers. Right now, he wouldn't even be able to defeat someone like Schoolboy or Levan Saginashvili. Sure, Brian is working hard to build up the muscles needed for arm wrestling, but without sufficient time spent on the table, these exercises won't translate into true arm wrestling strength. Brian Shaw has massive potential, but he's not a magician. He still needs to build core arm wrestling strengths, which include tendon and ligament strength, in addition to the different type of muscle strength required for arm wrestling. Fortunately, he seems to be taking the sport seriously, and his practice sessions are showing rapid improvement, as we can see from his videos. But realistically, he needs at least another 8 months or so before he can start competing with the elite. To be clear, I'm not talking about Brian Shaw winning against top-level arm wrestlers right away. That's not a realistic expectation. It would be a huge bonus if Shaw could win, but it's more reasonable to expect that he'll need time to build his skills. Even if he wins 3 or 4 out of 12 matches in his early competitions, that would be an impressive feat. The more table time he puts in, the faster his rise in the ranks of heavyweight arm wrestlers will be. Recently, in the past few months, we've seen videos of Derek Smith training Brian Shaw, which is a great step forward. Derek is one of the strongest arm wrestlers in North America and ranks among the top 5. He's also built similarly to Shaw, a massive individual with tremendous strength. Derek's mentorship will certainly help Brian prepare for arm wrestling at the highest levels. Other than that, Brian Shaw has also mentioned in one of his videos that he gets arm wrestlers to come and practice with him. He did not mention anything specific about those arm wrestlers, but I gather they must be arm wrestlers from the various arm wrestling clubs near his area. Shaw is a celebrity from the world of strength, so it will not be difficult for him to get arm wrestlers to practice on the table with. And this will really go a very long way to build up Shaw's arm wrestling muscles and strength. Exactly what he needs daily. He needs to participate in premier arm wrestling events like East vs. West and King of the Table. After about 12 to 15 matches over a 2.5-year period, Shaw might be ready to think about facing the top competitors like Devon Larratt, Ermes Gasparini, Alex Kurdicha, Ravaz, Georgi Setkov, and Gennady Kvakinia. Once Shaw can hold his own and put on competitive matches with these athletes, win some or lose some, he can start considering a match against Levan. Levan Saginashvili is the Mount Everest of arm wrestling. No one starts mountaineering by attempting to climb Everest. So let's give Brian Shaw the time he needs to develop. If everything goes right, in about 3.5 to 4 years, there could be a legitimate chance of seeing a Brian Shaw versus Levan Saginashvili showdown. Don't get sucked into the clickbait videos claiming that Brian Shaw can stop Denis Cyplenkov or that Levan is scared of him. Denis has never even arm wrestled or met Brian Shaw, and if Levan ever made a comment about being scared, it was probably just a joke. Everyone already knows that Levan could easily beat Brian Shaw at this point. There's no need for Levan to state the obvious. That said, we can certainly look forward to the possibility of a competitive match between these two incredible athletes in the future. But we must also remember that Brian Shaw is a huge celebrity with many other professional interests. Whether he'll stay dedicated to arm wrestling for the next 4 years is a serious question that only he can answer. What do you think? Let me know in the comments.